Today we'll talk about video games that reward players with cryptocurrencies. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's head into it. When the Taliban took over Afghanistan in August of last year, Faresh Taforo feared that the group would close her school in Herat, the country's third largest city. Code to Inspire, an NGO Foro founded, was teaching computer programming to young Afghan women, and the Taliban opposed secondary education for women. Months later, the picture is much different and worse from what Foro imagined. The school survived, becoming mostly virtual, but has transformed from a coding boot camp into a relief organization. The biggest risk for Foro students wasn't lack of education, it was hunger. Foro looked for a way to provide emergency checks to the women, but was stymied by banks that don't want to risk violating severe US sanctions. JP Morgan Chase repeatedly blocked her attempts to transfer money, she said, and she grew increasingly alarmed by students who said they couldn't access cash at local Afghan banks, many of which closed or imposed strict withdrawal limits. In response, she turned to cryptocurrency to provide monthly emergency payments to help students afford enough food to survive. There are several advantages to use crypto. Afghans fleeing the Taliban can take their assets with them without risk. Humanitarian agencies seeking to bypass banks and discreetly avoid the Taliban can provide cash directly to those in need. Smugglers and intermediaries who may steal or try to resell aid packages can be circumvented if aid is given directly through a digital transaction. While Code to Inspire is in a uniquely tech-savvy position compared with most Afghan organizations, Foro isn't alone in thinking that blockchain-based solutions may help Afghans in need in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis. Several other NGOs and humanitarian organizations facing a choice between failed banks still hampered by sanctions and Hawala networks of informal money traders that many fear are tied to the drug trade or controlled by the Taliban are considering the use of cryptocurrency as an alternative. One American attorney advising international groups in Afghanistan said that his clients are moving closer to experimenting with crypto payments, though he was not at liberty to identify the NGOs and asked for anonymity to protect their identities. Others are stepping up in a more visible way to harness the power of cryptocurrency to deliver assistance. A liquidity crisis is at the heart of the growing catastrophe in Afghanistan. Following the pullout of US forces last August, the country was isolated overnight. The US seized assets from the Afghan central bank and ended transfers of US currency. Companies in Poland and France contracted to print the Afghani ended shipments. Almost immediately, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, known as the SWIFT system, which underpins international financial transactions, suspended services in Afghanistan. Commercial banks couldn't lend money, and retail customers couldn't take their own money out of banks. The departure of the international community, fearing that any transaction within Afghanistan would violate sanctions of the Taliban, ground the economy to a halt. Nearly 4/5 of the Afghan budget was foreign funded before the US left. The Biden administration has issued exemptions to the sanctions for humanitarian aid. These Treasury Department licenses, however, have done little to mitigate the spiraling crisis. As The Intercept has reported, Taliban leaders listed by the sanctions are in charge of senior Afghan government positions, leading many banks to continue to block routine transactions because they conclude that any tax or duty paid to the government could risk violating sanctions. Overcompliance and compliance costs associated with the sanctions have damaged the ability to conduct ordinary commerce in the country, leading to mass unemployment and skyrocketing food and fuel costs. So though humanitarian aid is technically allowed, restrictions by banks have made it functionally impossible. Several US banks contacted by The Intercept declined to comment on the record about the shutoff of transactions with Afghanistan. We comply with all economic sanctions laws and regulations and process NGO-related payments accordingly. We have no further information to share, said a spokesperson for Wells Fargo. New reports continue to show ghastly consequences on the economic collapse in the country. Parents have sold children into arranged marriages in order to purchase enough food to survive. In Kandahar, a high school teacher recently died of starvation after at least 4 days of not eating. According to a local human rights watchdog, UNICEF estimates that 3.2 million children face malnutrition and over 1 million face the immediate risk of death by starvation. The United Nations reports that only 2% of Afghanistan's population of 40 million is getting enough to eat. The Biden administration, while choking off the Afghan economy, has approved $782 million in aid since October. The funds include shelter, emergency food, and hygiene services. dollars and 1 million COVID-19 vaccine doses. The challenges to introducing cryptocurrency payments and transactions, however, are steep. Cashless digital transactions that sidestep traditional banks still pose risks, especially for US citizens or financial institutions, facilitating or investing in platforms for Afghans. Despite the steep learning curve and several barriers to entry, within Afghanistan, using crypto is seen as an unqualified improvement on the status quo. Zafar recalled working in Afghanistan years ago when militants would raid vans transporting cash around the country. Foro said that her sister's bank account was seized by the Taliban after the US withdrawal because of her work with Western groups. There are more and more new reports of banks closing. With crypto, Foro's tiny pocket of Afghanistan is surviving. What do you think about this use of crypto? Let us know in the comment section. This brings us to the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our videos in the future. Also, watch the 2 videos that are on your screen because I'm sure you'll love them. With that, I'll see you in the next video.